untold centuries, I, Braxus, Lord of the Pit, have returned!
We are talking about Beastmaster 3, The Eye of Braxus. This one is directed by Gabrielle Beaumont and once again stars Marc Singer as Dar. Got a few recognisable names in this one actually. You have Tony Todd playing Seth, a role that was in the first movie, although lacking in the second one. You've also got former Sonya Blade, Sandra Hess, that's a kind of a warrior woman. You've got Casper Van Dien playing King Tull, who was also in the first movie, played by, again, a different actor. You've got Lesley-Anne Down, you've got David Warner. A pretty good cast, to be honest with you, in this movie. So this is 1996, I believe this came out. So not long, a few years after the second movie, but it really feels a lot more modern than the second film, despite there being a short difference between second and third than first and second. So the story here is we have a evil sorcerer kidnaps the Beastmaster's brother, played by Casper Van Dien, because he has a particular amulet that is the key to unlocking this ancient power. And Dar, along with Seth, played by Tony Todd, and a couple of new allies must go after David Warner's character and his army of soldiers and try and rescue his brother and free the land from the tyranny of this evil wizard. That's your basic story in a nutshell, nothing too complicated here. So first of all, what works for this movie? Okay, I think first of all, Marc Singer still in great shape, you know, and he isn't quite a surfer boy, peroxide boy, as he did in the second movie. It's kind of more of his natural kind of hair colour, so that always bothered me in this second film. I thought, why is he a peroxide blonde in this movie? Here, at least, he looks a little bit less like it's a bleach dye job, to be honest with you. So there is that. I really enjoyed Lesley-Anne Dow's character here as this kind of sexy seductress witch character who is kind of quite playful. You know, she doesn't really turn up until really towards the end of the movie, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed her character, and I think Tony Todd does a good job as well. Obviously, Tony Todd, you know from Candyman, I'm sure, and he's playing Seth by, you know, who was originally played by like John Amos in the original movie. Different take on the character. He's more of a kind of a comedic sidekick here, to be honest, but nonetheless, I still quite enjoyed him. But this movie really is quite bad. So having watched the Beastmaster sequels quite recently to review, when I was younger, I obviously had watched these movies to begin with, and I didn't really like the second one, but on the rewatch, I actually quite liked it more. But on the rewatch of the third one, I have to say, I thought this movie was one of the worst fantasy movies I've seen. Let's talk about the thing that bugged me the most, and it's not something I often talk about, the soundtrack. It is terrible. The soundtrack of this is done by Jan Hammer, famous, of course, for his themes for Miami Vice. It so does not fit this movie. It's you have this, like, very, you know, Miami Vice style kind of soundtrack on this kind of fantasy movie aesthetic. It does not work at all. It is so distracting. They would have been better to use the first soundtrack from the original Beastmaster. I'm assuming they didn't have the rights for it, but it's terrible. The soundtrack is so distractingly bad. The acting is terrible from a good portion of the speaking cast. I've mentioned I quite like a couple of the characters here. You know, they do okay performances. I think fun characters for a cheesy movie. But a lot of the kind of like the smaller roles, like the guards and the soldiers, things like this, the kind of villagers that they talk about, is just awful. I mean, it is. You want to scratch your ears out when you kind of hear these line deliveries. It's terrible stuff. This has a really odd-looking aesthetic. So this movie seems super low budget, and it seems like a very like a TV episode. Now, I know that Beastmaster went on to become a TV episode, a TV series. I wonder if this was almost the kind of the proof of concept. It does seem to be they're almost setting it up to be to go on to have more adventures. Now, in the series, obviously, the Beastmaster was actually recast, so this didn't really follow on from this. But I feel maybe the original plan was to have this as a kind of a TV pilot, so to speak. But it's so cheap looking. It is so cheap looking. Now, in the second movie, I mentioned in the scenes where we see on Dar's planet and all that, I still think there is some that argument to be had that the aesthetic still fits with the first movie. It still kind of looks reasonably grandiose, reasonably the set designs you can imagine still being in the first movie. This one, no way. It just looks absolutely cheap. It just looks like they've knocked up a quick set behind the lot with some kind of really kind of fake looking stones and things like that. The way the film is shot, it really feels like we have a TV director here, because there's lots of kind of like close-ups. We very rarely get any kind of wide shots, and when we do, it's more or less just kind of stock footage of kind of like a a helicopter going around and filming the kind of scenery and things like that. It really feels like a very like early episode of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys and things like that. It's absolutely horrible. The story is just nothing. Casper Van Dien is completely miscast as the brother Tal, who in the first movie was a young brunette guy, and now he's like a bleached blonde guy. There's other inconsistencies. Once again, the animals are all different. Podo and Kodo are back, despite one of them being killed in the first film, them being left in modern-day Los Angeles in the second film, yet they're both back in this one. Vu is now a lion rather than a black tiger that he was in the first film, a regular tiger that he was in the second film, and now he's a male lion. And then Chirac is obviously a different bird as well, considerably smaller. So there's little to little kind of cohesive material here. Dar is also played to be a little bit of a doofus in this movie, whilst he seems quite capable in the first movie, and maybe the second one. But you can argue he was a fish out of water in that one. So it's kind of like, but nonetheless, he's still got the job done. Here, he just seems to step into trouble almost every time. For example, there's a trap that is set, which Tony tells Seth says, "Do not touch the trap." Yet he does and sets off the trap. Things like this. So the writing it seems like a different sort of character to me. And then we got to talk about the bad guy, David Warner. So he plays this sorcerer, and all he does is stand around and talk in this kind of like this chamber. They employ the use of motion technology. The morphing technology, which was kind of popular in the 90s. It looks crap. And then he turns into a big demon. This demon literally looks like it was taken out of that TV show Dinosaurs that was aired again in the 90s, or like a Power Rangers villain. It looks awful. It looks like a kid's thing. It's such a terrible film. Really, really bad. So this movie, I think a 3 out of 10 is generous, if I'm honest. And that's only because I like Lesley-Anne Down and Marc Singer. There is nothing to say this movie does anything right. It is terrible. 3 out of 10, and I think I'm being generous with this one. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.